When Jackson's beloved goat, Baxter, was unjustly targeted by the HOA president, Rick, it seemed like his peace and property were under threat. Rick's overreach and control, treating Jackson's ranch like it was public property, left everyone enraged. But Jackson wasn't about to back down. He wasn't just a rancher, but a former federal agent with a powerful card to play. But just wait for the shocking twist that turned the tide, and how, in the end, justice was quietly but undeniably restored. Jackson Taylor had always cherished the quiet mornings on his ranch, the sun rising over the horizon, the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees, and the familiar bleats of his goats made the place feel like a refuge from the world. Baxter, his favorite goat, was more than just an animal to him. He was a companion, a source of comfort after years of hard work and personal struggles. But that morning, something felt wrong. Jackson scanned the pasture, his eyes searching for Baxter's familiar silhouette. The usual sounds of chewing and contented munching were replaced by an eerie silence. Panic started to creep in as he called out Baxter's name, his voice cracking slightly. No response, just the wind. Then, in the distance, Jackson saw the flash of unfamiliar vehicles turning onto his property. A group of official-looking trucks with men stepping out in uniforms. Animal control. His heart sank. He recognized the lead vehicle immediately. It was the same crew Rick, the HOA president, had bragged about over neighborhood meetings. Men who showed up without warning, enforcing rules that seem more about control than care. Jackson's stomach tightened as the reality hit him. Rick had called them. Without so much as a phone call or a conversation, Rick had decided Baxter was a problem that needed removing. Jackson couldn't believe the audacity. His ranch was his sanctuary, his private land, his home. Yet here was Rick, treating it like some public park, ordering strangers to invade it and take away a part of his family. For a moment, Jackson stood frozen. It wasn't just about the goat. It was the principle, the invasion, the disrespect. The violation of trust and boundaries stung deeper than he expected. The shock struck him like a jolt of electricity, making his blood run cold. He felt powerless, standing on his own land, watching strangers move closer to Baxter's pen, unaware that this peaceful morning was about to spiral into a battle for everything he held dear. The more Jackson thought about it, the more he felt the anger simmering in his chest, growing hotter with each passing second. Rick, that man, the HOA president, who lived miles away in his perfectly manicured cookie-cutter subdivision, felt entitled to control everything within miles of his own little kingdom. But this wasn't just a matter of rules or fines. This was something personal. Jackson had never asked for any part of that HOA's invasive oversight, but Rick seemed to believe that he had the right to decide what Jackson could do on his own land. The idea that a man who didn't even live in the same zip code had the gall to make decisions for Jackson's ranch was absurd. It wasn't just about the goat. It was about the principle. Rick, with his obsession for order, his need to control, didn't care to understand that Baxter wasn't just any animal. He wasn't some wandering creature that could be shuffled away because it didn't fit into some idealized image of a proper property. Baxter had been there when everything else had fallen apart for Jackson. After the divorce, the loneliness, the years of unanswered questions, Baxter had been the one constant. He wasn't just a goat. He was a friend, a companion who offered quiet comfort when Jackson didn't have words or people to lean on. Baxter's goofy antics and quiet presence had brought Jackson back from the edge of despair more times than he could count. And Rick? He couldn't see that. All he saw was a goat that didn't fit into his perfect vision of suburban order. It didn't matter to Rick that Jackson's ranch was a place of healing, of peace. It didn't matter that Baxter was family. To Rick, Baxter was just another thing to control, to regulate, to place into a box. And Jackson had no tolerance for it. Every time Rick's name flashed in his mind, a rush of hatred followed. How dare this man invade his life without a conversation, without so much as a word of respect? A courtesy phone call? Rick had crossed a line and Jackson was furious. The HOA wasn't just meddling in his affairs anymore. They were attacking his very identity, his connection to this land, to Baxter, and to everything he had worked to rebuild after everything else had fallen apart. This wasn't just an intrusion. It was a direct assault on his life, his values, and his sense of self. It felt like everything Jackson had worked to create, everything that had helped him rebuild his life, was under threat. And Rick was standing in the middle of it all, wielding his power like some petty tyrant. Jackson's fists clenched, his body tight with the need to do something, anything, to make Rick understand that this wasn't just about a goat. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. And it was about time someone put Rick in his place. By the time the animal control officers arrived, Jackson's anger had reached a breaking point. His pulse raced in his ears as he stood in the doorway, staring out at the scene unfolding before him. Every inch of his body was taut with rage. The sheer audacity of it all made his blood boil. They were here to take his goat, his family, like it was nothing. Rick's face was a smug mask of superiority, as if he'd already won. But Jackson wasn't the kind of man to let that stand. No, Jackson was no ordinary rancher. Before the acres of this land and the quiet life he had built, he had been a federal agent, trained for high-pressure situations, trained to keep his cool, even when everything around him screamed for action. This was no different. His breath was steady, his mind sharp. He wasn't going to let this man or these officers push him around. With a calm, deliberate motion, Jackson stepped out into the open, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. He didn't rush, didn't shout. He simply stood tall, his eyes locked on Rick's. And then he did something that sent an unmistakable message. With a smooth, almost casual motion, Jackson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the keys to his black, armored federal SUV. The effect was instant. The animal control officers, who had been marching toward Baxter's pen with that professional air of authority, hesitated. A split second of doubt flickered in their eyes. Rick, standing off to the side with his arms crossed, suddenly faltered. His smug expression slowly faded into one of uncertainty, like a man who just realized he might have bitten off more than he could chew. Jackson's fury simmered beneath the surface, but it didn't explode. Instead, it radiated from him in a controlled, almost terrifying way. His calmness was the real weapon, the calm of a man who had faced much greater challenges than this and knew exactly how to handle them. His stance, his quiet confidence, was a direct challenge to Rick and the officers. They were on his turf now. This wasn't a simple matter of a goat. This was his land, his home. and he wasn't about to let anyone take that from him without a fight. Rick's posture stiffened, his eyes darting toward the vehicle, then back to Jackson. The message was clear. This wasn't just some rancher he could push around. Jackson wasn't a man to be bullied. He wasn't some meek person to be silenced by authority. No, he was a force to be reckoned with. And Rick was starting to understand that. The officers didn't move forward. They stood still, unsure of what to do next. The quiet tension in the air felt almost tangible. Jackson's presence, calm but fierce, had shifted the dynamics entirely. He didn't need to raise his voice. His power was in his stillness, in the sheer confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he stood to protect. "Do you have a problem?" Jackson's voice was low, steady, but laced with undeniable authority. Rick took a step back. The smirk was gone, replaced by an expression that bordered on concern. This wasn't a game anymore. Jackson wasn't playing by Rick's rules. He was playing by his own. In the end, Rick and the HOA had no choice but to back down. What started as a brazen power grab over a goat turned into a lesson in humility, one that Rick would never forget. The animal control officers, after a few tense moments and whispered exchanges, left without taking a single step toward Baxter's pen. The victory wasn't just about keeping Baxter, though that was a sweet part of it. It was about something far deeper. Jackson had reclaimed his sense of justice, all with quiet strength and unwavering dignity. The authorities, perhaps realizing the weight of the situation, didn't push further. Rick, who had come charging in with his entitlement and smugness, had found himself standing on shaky ground. His attempt to impose his will on Jackson's property, to treat it like a public forum for his personal vendettas, had crumbled before the cold, hard reality of Jackson's position. Jackson's experience, his past as a federal agent, had been the very thing Rick had underestimated. The black SUV was more than just a vehicle. It was a reminder that Jackson wasn't a man you trampled on without consequence. Rick's smug demeanor had dissolved into an awkward retreat, his posture deflating as quickly as his inflated sense of power. Jackson watched, still standing firm, as the animal control officers, looking somewhat sheepish, got back in their vehicle and drove off. The tension that had gripped the ranch moments before slowly evaporated, replaced by a quiet, almost serene satisfaction. Baxter was safe. The land was still his sanctuary untouched by the overreach of the HOA. Jackson had proven that sometimes justice wasn't something you shouted about. It was something you calmly, steadily, and decisively took back when it was being stolen from you. Rick had learned the hard way. There was a cost to stepping on people's rights. It wasn't something that could be easily ignored or brushed aside. And when you tried to push someone into a corner, especially someone with Jackson's experience and resolve, the consequences were far-reaching. The victory wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't filled with victory cries or theatrical gestures. But it was real. And it was satisfying in a way that only quiet victories could be. Jackson had stood his ground, and in doing so, he had turned the tables. The system didn't break. It simply adjusted. Because Jackson wasn't asking for permission. He was demanding respect. Jackson's story wasn't just about a man protecting his goat. It was about reclaiming his space, his rights, and his dignity. It was a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of injustice, of using your voice and experience to fight back in a world that often overlooks the small but important battles. It reminded everyone watching that no matter how small the fight may seem, there's always room for a victory. Even when the odds seem stacked against you, strength, integrity, and resolve can turn the tide. In the end, Jackson wasn't just protecting his goat. He was protecting what mattered most: his peace, his land, and the quiet power of knowing that sometimes the biggest victories come not from loud battles, but from knowing when and how to fight.